You are standing in a sunlit living room, watching a perfectly still scene that is actually a ticking bomb. You see a tail, just the very tip of it, twitching back and forth like a metronome in a quiet house. To you, that movement looks like 10% of a greeting. But in this room, 1 in 10 isn't just a number, it's a failure rate. Specifically, it is the statistical probability that a single misinterpreted muscle twitch will result in a trip to the emergency vet. You've been told since you were a child that these two animals are natural enemies, locked in an ancient war for territory, resources, or perhaps just some ingrained spite that predates human history. You think you understand why they fight. You think it's about a dog's urge to chase and a cat's urge to hide. But you're wrong. The truth is much colder, and it has nothing to do with hate. They aren't fighting because they are rivals. They are fighting because their bodies are lying to them and the translation is failing in real time. We need to talk about the static on the line. The first thing we have to do is dismantle the biggest lie in your childhood cartoons. The idea of the natural enemy is a human invention, a way for us to project our own concepts of war and rivalry onto creatures that don't actually possess the hardware for it. In nature, a natural enemy is usually a predator-prey relationship or a direct competitor for the exact same food source. Think of the lion and the hyena, or the mongoose and the cobra. But cats and dogs? In the wild, they almost never cross paths in a way that would require an evolutionary vendetta. They evolved in different niches, hunting different things at different times of the day. If you saw a wildcat and a wolf in the same forest 10,000 years ago, they wouldn't rush into a dramatic battle for the throne of the woods. They would likely just walk in opposite directions. The fight only happens when we force them into the same four walls and tell them to share a water bowl. The conflict isn't ancient history, it's a modern short circuit. It is a faulty relay in a system that was never designed to handle this much crosstalk. Think of this faulty relay as a cracked lens through which they view every interaction. The most famous example, the one everyone thinks they know, is the tail. But the depth of this misunderstanding is actually staggering when you look at the mechanics. In the canine world, a wagging tail is a social lubricant. It's a broadcast signal that says, I am present, I am non-threatening, and I am open for negotiation. It releases pheromones from the anal glands, literally wafting a business card of information toward the other party. But when that same signal hits a cat's brain, the relay snaps. To a cat, a wagging tail, specifically that rhythmic side-to-side thrashing, is the biological equivalent of a red alert. It is the sign of a nervous system that is reaching its boiling point. It's what a cat does right before it launches a tactical strike. So the dog approaches, wagging its tail to say hello, and the cat reads it as, I am about to explode. The cat's tail begins to twitch in genuine irritation, which the dog reads as an invitation to play. They are two people trying to navigate a minefield, but every time one says I love you, the other hears a death threat. This faulty relay isn't just a quirk of body language, it's baked into their very origins. To understand why the wires are so crossed, we have to go back 42 million years to the Miacids. These were small, marten-like carnivores that lived in the trees of the Eocene epoch. They are the common ancestor of both the dog and the cat. But around that time, the lineage split into two massive groups, the Feliformia, or cat-like carnivores, and the Caniformia, the dog-like ones. For 40 million years, these two groups lived in total silence from one another. Dogs moved into the open plains, evolving into social cooperative pack hunters that relied on group dynamics and clear, loud communication to survive. Cats stayed in the shadows, evolving into solitary ambush predators, where silence and invisibility were the only currencies that mattered. By the time humans decided to put them both on a sofa together in the late Holocene, they were effectively from different planets. They had spent 40 million years developing two completely different operating systems. When they look at each other today, they aren't seeing a rival, they are seeing a glitch in the matrix. They are seeing a creature that moves, smells, and sounds like a predator, but refuses to follow the rules of engagement. This brings us to the first major physical danger in this broken translation, the eye contact paradox. In the social world of the dog, direct, unblinking eye contact is a challenge. It is a dominant stare that demands a response. To keep the peace, dogs have evolved a suite of calming signals, like looking away or blinking rapidly, to show they aren't looking for a fight. But enter the cat. In feline communication, a slow, soft blink is the ultimate sign of trust. It's a slow-motion kiss that says, I feel safe enough to close my eyes in your presence. Now imagine the faulty relay in action. A cat looks at a dog and gives it a slow, loving blink. The dog, wired for social tension, sees the cat close its eyes and interprets it as a moment of vulnerability or a weird social lapse. Or, more commonly, the dog stares at the cat with intense, curious interest. The cat, seeing an unfamiliar predator refuse to look away or blink, triggers its prehistoric flight or fight reflex. It's not just a misunderstanding, it's an invitation to violence that neither party actually sent. The question isn't why they fight, but rather how do they ever stop? The static on the line gets even noisier when you consider the sheer physics of their playstyles. If you've ever watched a group of puppies, you know it's a chaotic mess of body slamming, ear nipping, and vocal growling. For a dog, play is a simulation of the hunt, but it's collaborative. It's about the joy of the chase and the physical contact of the pack. But cats play differently. A cat's play is a solitary rehearsal for a kill. It is stalking, pouncing, and immediate retraction. A cat doesn't want to wrestle with its prey, it wants to neutralize it. When a dog tries to initiate a play bow, lowering its front half while keeping its rear up, which is the universal canine sign for everything I do next is a joke. The cat doesn't have the software to download that information. It sees a massive heavy creature suddenly lunging toward it with bared teeth and a loud bark. The relay fails again. The dog is playing a game of tag. The cat thinks it's fighting for its life. This mismatch is why so many fights seem to start out of nowhere. It's just one animal trying to be a friend and the other animal reacting to a perceived assassination attempt. But here is where the science gets genuinely weird, and it involves a study that reframes the entire power dynamic. In 2008, researchers Nitzan Feuerstein and Joseph Turkel at Tel Aviv University conducted a landmark study involving over 170 cats and 25 dogs living in the same homes. They weren't just looking at whether they fought, they were looking at how they learned. What they found was a wow fact that most pet owners completely miss. Cats and dogs can actually learn to speak a second language, but only if they are exposed during a very specific golden window of brain development. For a cat, this window is incredibly narrow, usually between 7 and 9 weeks of age. If a kitten meets a dog during this time, its brain is plastic enough to record the dog wag as something other than a threat. It essentially builds a patch for the faulty relay. But if that window closes, the static becomes permanent. The study revealed that even in homes where the animals seemed to get along, they were often still living in a state of peaceful misunderstanding, where they simply agreed to ignore the signals they couldn't translate. It's a fragile truce, held together by the hope that the static doesn't suddenly turn into a spark. We have to look deeper into the biological hardware to see why that spark is so dangerous. We need to talk about the Jacobson's organ, or the vomeronal organ. Both cats and dogs have this sixth sense, located in the roof of the mouth, allowing them to taste pheromones in the air. This is the ultimate communication tool, a direct line to the emotional state of another animal. You've seen a cat do the flamen response, where they wrinkle their nose and leave their mouth slightly open. They are literally pulling chemical data into their brain. Here's the problem. A dog under stress produces a specific cocktail of pheromones, including high levels of cortisol and adrenaline. A cat, sensing these chemicals through its Jacobson's organ, receives a clear message. Asterisk, danger, aggression, imminent threat. Asterisk, even if the dog is standing perfectly still, its scent is screaming at the cat. The cat, in turn, begins to emit its own fear scent, which triggers the dog's ancient predatory chase instinct. They are trapped in a chemical feedback loop that neither of them can smell or see, but that both are powerless to ignore. The faulty relay isn't just in their eyes or their tails, it's in the very air between them. The most counterintuitive part of this entire dynamic is that the cat is almost always the one in control of the violence, even though it's usually the smaller animal. Because cats are mesopredators, meaning they are both hunters and hunted. Their nervous systems are tuned to a much higher frequency of defensiveness than a dog's. A dog's primary strategy in a conflict is social negotiation, or if that fails, a full-scale chase. But a cat's primary strategy is explosive defense. They have to make themselves seem so incredibly dangerous and costly to attack that a larger predator decides it's not worth the effort. This is why a 10-pound cat can send a 90-pound German Shepherd running for cover. The cat isn't trying to win the fight, it's trying to end the interaction through sheer psychological terror. This creates a terrifying loop for the dog. The dog approaches with curiosity, gets hit with a sensory overload of hissing, claws, and arched fur, and learns that the small furry thing is actually a vibrating ball of razors. But because the dog's chase instinct is so deeply rooted in the Caniformia lineage, the moment the cat turns to run, the dog's brain overrides its fear and tells it to move. The static on the line becomes a physical pursuit, and that's when the tragedy usually happens. But what if the fighting isn't the most interesting part? What if the real mystery is the silence? There is a specific phenomenon called piloerection, the raising of the hair along the spine, often called hackles. In dogs, this is an involuntary reflex caused by a rush of adrenaline. It doesn't necessarily mean the dog is angry. It just means it is highly aroused, which could be from excitement, fear, or confusion. In cats, piloerection is a deliberate attempt to look larger, a defensive bluff. When a dog with raised hackles approaches a cat with an arched back, they are both looking at a distorted, hyperinflated version of reality. They aren't even seeing the other animal anymore. They are seeing a biological exaggeration. The faulty relay has turned a simple encounter into a horror movie, and yet humans often look at this and laugh, or assume they're just playing. We fail to realize that for the animals involved, this is a high-stakes failure of intelligence. They are both trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that don't fit, and the frustration of that failure often manifests as the very aggression we see as natural. This brings us to a reveal that changes everything we think we know about their hatred. In many cases, dogs and cats don't fight because they are different. They fight because they are too similar. Both species are highly territorial, and both rely on a sense of safe space to regulate their emotions. But they define that space differently. A dog's territory is social. It's the group, the people, and the path they walk. A cat's territory is vertical and physical. It is the specific shelf, the specific corner, the specific scent mark on the doorframe. When a dog walks into a cat's space, it isn't just a social intrusion. It is a physical violation of the cat's sense of self. The dog, being a social animal, thinks it's just joining a group. The cat, being a solitary one, thinks its world is being colonized. This is why you'll see a cat allow a dog to sleep 3 feet away on the rug, but the moment the dog moves toward the cat's safe perch, the claws come out. It's not about the dog, it's about the geography of the room. The faulty relay has confused a social greeting with a land grab. But what if I told you there is an even deeper level of static that we are only just beginning to understand? It has to do with the way they process sound. Cats have some of the most sensitive hearing in the mammalian world, capable of detecting ultrasonic frequencies used by rodents. Dogs, while also possessing great hearing, focus more on the lower frequency vocalizations of their pack members. When a dog barks, it is a massive percussive blast of sound that is designed to travel over long distances. To a cat, a dog's bark isn't just a noise. It is a physical assault on their eardrums. It triggers a startle response that is almost impossible to override. Even a friendly, excited bark can cause a cat's heart rate to spike and its pupils to dilate, putting it into a state of hypervigilance. The dog sees the cat's sudden tension and wonders what it did wrong, often barking again to try and re-engage. The relay has now become a megaphone of misunderstanding, where even the sound of friendship feels like a weapon. The truth is that we have spent centuries breeding these animals to fit our needs, but we've done very little to help them fit each other. We've bred dogs for high prey drive to help us hunt, and then we act surprised when they chase the kitten. We've bred cats for their independent spirit, to keep our granaries clear of mice, and then we act surprised when they refuse to play nice with the Labrador. We are the ones who created the environment for the short circuit, and then we blame the animals for the sparks. The 2008 Tel Aviv study proved that the natural enemy trope is a choice, not a destiny. But it also proved that without active, careful intervention, the default state of these two species is a state of profound, dangerous confusion. The fight is just the sound of two biological systems hitting a dead end. So why do they really fight? It isn't because of a 40-million-year-old war. It isn't because they want to be the top pet in your heart. It's because the static on the line is simply too loud to ignore. Every time a dog moves, it sends a signal. Every time a cat blinks, it sends a signal. But because of the faulty relay, those signals are being received by a brain that speaks a different dialect, carries a different history, and fears a different shadow. The dog is looking for a partner in the pack. The cat is looking for a ghost in the grass. When they meet in the middle, they aren't seeing a friend or an enemy. They are seeing a riddle they can't solve. And in the animal kingdom, a riddle you can't solve is usually something that is trying to eat you. This leads us to a final, counterintuitive wow fact. In households where cats and dogs get along, researchers have noticed that the animals often stop using their species-specific language entirely when interacting with each other. They develop a third language, a pidgin dialect of touches, scents, and specific silences that exists only between those two individuals. They stop wagging tails. They stop slow blinking. They find a way to bypass the faulty relay entirely by creating a new circuit. But this takes time, patience, and a level of cognitive flexibility that we often don't give animals credit for. It is a triumph of intelligence over instinct. But for every success story, there are 1,000 moments of static. There are 1,000 interactions where the translation fails, the relay snaps, and the room explodes into a blur of fur and noise. We are back in that sunlit living room. You are still watching that tale. 1 in 10. You think you've seen this before. You think you know what happens next. But look closer at that twitching tip. That movement is a piece of data that has no home. It is a signal being sent into a void. To the dog, it's a question. To the cat, it's an answer. But neither of them has the key to the code. We have built our world around the idea that we can domesticate the wild, that we can bring these two ancient lineages into our homes and make them one family. But we have forgotten that under the collars and the cute names, there is a 40 million-year-old silence that we cannot bridge with a few treats and a good boy. But here's the most haunting part of the static. The faulty relay isn't just a metaphor for their communication, it is a mirror for our own. We look at these animals and we see ourselves. We see our own inability to understand those who speak a different language. We see our own tendency to turn confusion into conflict. The reason the cats versus dogs trope is so enduring in our culture is because it is the ultimate expression of the human condition, the desperate desire to be understood, and the terrifying ease with which we can be misinterpreted. We aren't just watching a pet fight. We are watching the very mechanics of misunderstanding play out on our rugs. We are watching the price of a broken translation. And that brings us back to the image that started it all. You are standing there, held in the tension of the room, looking at that twitching tail. You realize now that you aren't looking at a pet or a companion. You are looking at a biological error. That tail isn't moving because the cat is happy, or even because it is angry. It is moving because the nervous system is overloaded with data it cannot process. It is the visual representation of the static. It is the sound of a system trying to reboot in the face of an impossible situation. And the dog is moving closer, its own tail wagging in a rhythm that means friendship in a language the cat will never learn. The next time you see them square off, don't look for the hate. Look for the static. Look for the moment the relay fails. Because in that split second, you aren't seeing an ancient rivalry. You are seeing the raw, unvarnished truth of evolution, that we are all just creatures trying to find a signal in the noise, and sometimes the noise is the only thing we have left. The fight isn't about territory or pride or the throne of the house. It's about the terrifying moment when you realize you are speaking to someone who can hear your voice but will never, ever understand what you are saying. Think about that the next time you try to introduce a new friend into the fold. Are you building a bridge, or are you just adding more static to the line? Does the reveal of the faulty relay change how you see the silent truces in your own home? Let me know in the comments if you've ever seen your pets develop that third language, or if you're still living in a house full of chemical static. If you want to keep digging into these biological rabbit holes, you know what to do. There's a lot more noise to filter through. You are still in that room. The tail flick has stopped. For a second, there is a perfect heavy silence. But don't let the quiet fool you. The 1 in 10 failure rate hasn't gone away. It's just waiting. You see the dog take one more step, chest low, eyes bright with the playbow that should be a joke. You see the cat's pupils dilate until they are nothing but black voids swallowing the light of the room. You realize now that you were never watching a greeting. You were watching a biological countdown. The tail isn't a flag of peace, it's a fuse. And as the dog lunges forward to play, and the cat's claws emerge from their velvet sheaths, you finally understand the definitive chilling truth. They aren't fighting because they are enemies. They are fighting because, in this room, there is no such thing as the truth. There is only the translation that fails. And in the animal kingdom, the cost of a failed translation is always, eventually, paid in blood.